Okay, so we're on page 28 of the World Wars, and the single biggest killer in the First World War was artillery fire. It churned up the ground, ripped men apart, and buried them alive under the mounds of earth. In the days leading up to a big infantry attack, artillery teams bombarded enemy positions with millions of high explosive shells. As far away as London, people could hear the roar of the guns in northern France, the distant thunder of an industrialized war. And here we have some women making shells in a munitions factory. And it was a hazardous job as accidental explosions were a constant danger. Okay, we've got a pretty cool picture here of Canadian soldiers loading a howitzer artillery gun. Such weapons were designed to fire a shell high into the air so it plunged down on a trench or fort with deadly penetrating force. For hundreds of years, warring armies had used artillery to fire cannonballs and other missiles. But in the decades leading up to the First World War, scientists began combining advances in weapons technology with the manufacturing power of huge factories. Thousands of guns rolled off the production lines, and they were bigger, easier to fire, and deadlier than ever. These artillery weapons were only a part of the new and terrifying arsenal of killing machines. In the trenches, there were 100 different ways to die. Hand grenades had been around for years, but new varieties were developed during the war. These were safer for the soldiers who were throwing them, but they caused terrible injuries in cramped trenches. Both sides also used flamethrowers to send jets of fire into enemy positions. Machine guns were also in use by this time, and their fire cut through attacking infantry like I can never pronounce that word, scythe, I believe. I always have trouble with that word. A scythe is like actually, I'll show you a picture. Show you a picture of a scythe, which I always have had trouble pronouncing that word. So this is it's an implement for cutting grass. Okay, it's an agriculture hand tool for mowing grass or harvesting crops. In 1885, an American inventor, Hiram Maxim, had harnessed the energy released by a shooting bullet to load the next round in an instant. Belts of bullets fed into the gun so it could fire 500 rounds every minute. Bullets could maim and kill, but what soldiers feared far more was shrapnel and high explosive shells. They were used in an attempt to destroy enemy trenches in advance of an infantry attack. And here's a picture of German soldiers on the edge of an Allied trench, standing up to throw a grenade as the man on the left is doing, exposed a soldier to terrible risk from enemy fire. Artillery shells were packed with recently invented explosives like dynamite or TNT, and they came in a fearful range of shapes and sizes. Shrapnel shells burst into hundreds of razor-sharp fragments before they hit the ground, slicing through flesh and bone. The shrapnel often picked up dirt before entering the body. Excuse me, my throat was a little scratchy there, causing fatal infections and blood poisoning. The effects of high explosives were even more terrifying. They could rip a man to tiny pieces. Massive siege shells were designed not to explode until they'd smash through a fort's stone and steel fortifications. Even with all the improvements in artillery, Army gunners still had a difficult task. They had to fire test shots to find the right target. This gave trench defenders plenty of warning before raids. There were problems with faulty shells that didn't explode, known as duds, while poor communications sometimes result in barrages falling too late or too early to be of much use to the attackers. It would take years for gunners to achieve the perfect timing and accuracy needed to protect infantry as they attacked, a key tactic that would eventually help to unlock the Western Front. Okay, so we've got a little video here about the British rifle.
Welcome to Bisley, the famous rifle ranges. During the years leading up to war, depots such as Bisley and many others up and down the country were used as training depots, preparing soldiers for service overseas. These depots are still used for this purpose today. This is a short magazined Lee Enfield, or SMLE for short. This is a standard infantry rifle issued to every soldier in 1914. It's a good rifle, and in good hands can be extremely effective. To use it, you first have to work the bolt. Now the bolt's open, the chamber's exposed, and you can load in your ammunition. In your pouch, you have 2 charger clips of 5 rounds each. You load in your charger clip, push the rounds down, leaving the charger clip out. The charger clip goes back into your pouch. Then you close the chamber. You're then ready to fire. Now, earlier versions of this SMLE would have had what's called a cut-off. This will allow you to separate the rounds in the chamber. So you could load in your 10 rounds, close the cut-off, and then continue to load in singly. If you were to engage a mass target of German infantry, you would open the cut-off and you'd be able to fire rapid. The Enfield got a maximum range of 2,000 yards. Although if you can see a target at 2,000, let alone hit it, then you're a better man than I am. It's got a killing zone, range of 600 yards. Anything from there downwards is an effective range and could be very, very deadly indeed. A trained shot professional could get off 15 aimed rounds a minute. That's a withering rate of fire. Now the weight is quite important. It's a heavy rifle, about 9 pounds in weight. So when you're on marches, manoeuvres, you've got your sling. If you're unfortunate enough to have to engage Fritz up close and personal, you've got your bayonet, 17 inches of cold steel. Fixes on the rifle and allows you to engage the enemy.
Okay, we're going to look at some French artillery.
I'm standing by the museum's French 75mm gun, which was their primary artillery weapon used in the war, and it was an advanced weapon for the time. It had an incredible system that allowed it to be fired very rapidly and not be moved from its place of firing, so it was very accurate in that aspect as well. Now, of course, in French, it was the 75, the 75. When the Americans entered the war, they really didn't have any artillery pieces, so we bought a lot of these French 75s from them. And there was a local fellow here that you might have heard of. His name was Harry Truman, who was a captain of artillery in the 35th Division. And when he had his crew, and all the other American crews that fired this type of gun, they couldn't say the French 75. And so their name for this gun was saucy cans. Saying 75 as saucy cans was one of the ways that the American soldiers, also known as doughboys, were able to communicate to the French whose country they were fighting in.
Okay, and then we're going to look at some munitions factories and some of the dangers of working in the munitions factories. So, munition workers played a crucial role in the First World War. They supplied the troops at the front with the armaments and equipment they needed to fight. They also freed up men from the workforce to join the armed forces. Following a shortage of shells in 1915, the Ministry of Munitions was founded to control Britain's output of war material. It oversaw all aspects of the production and supply of munitions under the forceful and energetic Minister for Munitions, David Lloyd George. A number of new initiatives were soon introduced to improve production levels. One of these was an appeal to women to register for war service work. Thousands of women volunteered as a result, and many of these were soon employed in the growing number of munitions factories across the country. By the end of the war, over 700,000 and possibly up to 1 million women had become munitionettes. There's the word, munitionettes. The munitionettes worked long hours in hazardous conditions. Here's stories of some of the dangers of the difficulties they faced by listening to these former munition workers. Okay, so I believe if I click on this, oh, I thought I was going to be able to listen to it there. I guess oh, here we go. Sorry. Their job was filling shells, and they were prone to suffer from TNT poisoning. TNT stood for there's the word. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that right there. An explosive which turned the skin yellow of those who regularly came in contact with it. They were affected by this, and they were known as canaries due to their bright yellow appearance. Although the visible effects usually wore off, some women died for it. And here is Ethel Dean, who worked at Woolwich Arsenal. And here's her talking. Oh, it says it's not available. Let's try this again.
Turned us yellow all over. We were absolutely that colour, the colour of my cushions. Yeah. And our hair was, I had black hair, it was practically green. Yeah. Well, it wore off. Once you come out of it, it wore off. Within a couple of weeks, it was gone. It wore right off very quickly. But while you were in it, while you were working it, you were yellow. It didn't make no difference. I mean, you could wash and it didn't make no difference. It didn't come off. Because your whole body was yellow. You were yellow all over. So, I mean, it didn't... you got a bit of a bath, so, I mean, it didn't wash off. But it wore off. Once you were out of it, it sort of got out the system, I suppose.
Okay, and as well as handling the hazardous TNT powder, munitions workers risk their health in other ways in the busy, dangerous factories. The working conditions vary, but they often featured poor ventilation, exposure to harmful chemicals, and sometimes even asbestos. And the physical labor involved, which included lifting heavy shells and operating machinery, could be backbreaking or extremely risky. And here's another...
And we used to do aerial torpedoes. Well, they were about a good 2 feet 6, I should think. And, they were heavy. So we used to fill them up with powder and, swing up that's all you could do, string them up the front like that, up to the other end of the hatch, you see. And then we used to have a doctor come round every fortnight, and he used to, pull our eyes down and pull our teeth and all that kind of thing. And I remember this doctor, he was looking at us girls one day, and he said, half of you girls have never had babies. He said, I suppose you thought you were pulling your stomachs to pieces, See, the powder used to go into your stomach. Now, a funny thing, I was never poisoned in my stomach with it, but I don't know if I was actually poisoned, but it used to go into their stomach and give them, bad pains in it, because, you see, we were supposed to keep our mouth shut. Well, you know what, girl, we didn't realise the danger, girl, really. See, when you're young, you don't realise then. We'd never been in a war, had we? So a lot of them used to have all these stomach pains, but I never did, never. And they used to give us milk to drink, I suppose, to counteract the poison in our, whatever it was in our inside. So we don't mind dying for our country. As I say, we were so young, we didn't realise.
Okay, this talks about how the munitions factories were very noisy. And Thomas Peck is going to describe the munitions factory he works at in England or in Britain. It was only a small place, but the machinery and how loud it was.
Oh, well, a bit dingy and noisy. You couldn't hear yourself speak without shouting at you. The noise was terrible, really. The din of all the machines going at the time. Yeah. You couldn't make yourself heard. No, you could only talk when you was off duty, really. But you just got on with it. You had to stand all day long. It was a bit tiring there. But, no different to service. If wartime, and that was it.
Well, it says Thomas Peck, but that sounds like a female, so I don't know. And here's working as they did long before modern-day health and safety legislation. Workplace accidents were not unusual for employees, from relatively minor injuries to more serious incidents and even death. Munitions workers risk their health and often their lives while carrying out their jobs. The exact number of fatalities is difficult to know. Isabella Clark remembered that her friend died from the effects of gas poisoning contracted while they were filling gas shells. And Henry Oxley remembered from his time at Woolwich Arsenal, he said, prevalent in my particular job was filings coming off the machine into one's eyes. There was no protection to shield your eyes from the filings coming up. And that was an occurrence which happened quite often.
Oh, there was little, yes, of course, you always always heard of somebody getting hurt, like. I've seen the ambulance fetch people out lots of times, but they've only been slightly hurt, not seriously hurt. When I was soldering one of the bullets up, it sort of went back and then bang on my fingers. As I said, those 2 fingers have always been a bit funny. But I was away from work for about 6 weeks with it. I couldn't use my arm. They put me on a sling. I couldn't use it. I had to go to work because they wouldn't pay me. I had to go to work every day to get my wages. But because I couldn't stay at home. They wouldn't let me stay at home. They wouldn't pay me. But I had to go to work every day, although I didn't do anything.
And then there's also a threat of explosion at some of these factories. The massive amount of explosive material kept at the factories meant that this was an ever-present danger for those working at them. One of the largest disasters occurred at Silvertown in London's East End in January 1917. As many as 73 people were killed and 400 injured. Florence Parsons was working nearby, and she remembered the huge sound the factory made as it went up. And I think this is going to be her talking.
When there were two explosions over there. The first, I can't remember whether it was 42 shell stores or 41. My mother worked in, I'm nearly sure she worked in 41, and it was 42 that the explosion was in. But I was on E block, and then the shell stores that went up was just like across there, like that block is, but lower down. And we just got to work, just got there for night shift. We went on 10 till 6. And we'd only just got there, and I was just picking a shell up like, to put fuse on, when this explosion, you know, there were so many killed. Now, I only remember one name, and they called her Florence Naylor. And she lived in Gelderd Road.
Okay, and they also had very long hours. The working days for a munitions worker varied, but they could be up to 12 hours long, as most factories operated day and night. They remembered how exhausting the night shifts were.
I had no freedom as regards going and enjoying myself. I mean, it was all bed and work. Because when I was on days, it would be 7 o'clock when I got home. By the time I'd had my tea and that, well, I was ready for bed. It was 6 in the morning till 6 at night. Same at night, 6 at night till 6 next morning. Yeah, you see. I mean, I was up at 4 o'clock. I had to be up at 4 o'clock to catch the train at 5. I mean, it was a long day for a girl 17. They wouldn't do it today. They wouldn't, honestly. No.
Despite such a tiring workday, munitions workers didn't have many or particularly long breaks. Some even remembered having no breaks at all. The better factories provide canteens, washrooms, and toilet facilities for their employees, but they were not to be found at every workplace. When Kathleen Gilbert was a munitions worker in London, the hours were from 6 to 5:30, standing all the time. We had a 10-minute break to go to the toilets, and we had to stand and eat sandwiches at the machine.
Well, we used to have when you were day work, you had a quarter of an hour for your coffee morning, and then you'd have an hour for dinner, or sometimes half an hour for dinner. So you'd get a 10 minutes tea break for the afternoon cup of tea. More often than not, we used to make our own, because it was quicker. We used to go to the end of the room where all the hot water, just make our tea, and we could get it quicker than going up to the canteen and lining up and waiting for it.
Also, they're saying here it was very repetitive work. So they were doing a lot of the same things over and over again.
They sent me to this detonator place. There was a cap like that, and that had to unscrew, come off, and that all comprised of about a dozen different things, little springs, little this, little that, all packed in there, you know, in its order. And each part had to come out, be measured with a thing that we had for measuring, and weighing the springs to see if they took the right pressure and all that sort of thing. One would do this, one would do that, one would go see. As you done that box load, so you'd pass that box on, the next girl would do her part to it, and that's how it would go on right down the table. When it got to the end of the table, it would come back the other end, being assembled again. Didn't do all the job yourself. That was how it was done.
So it says at the start of the First World War, there were strict controls in Britain over the types of jobs women could have, but the increasing need for more men in the armed forces meant that these had to be removed so women could take men's place in the workplace. Although women were already able to work in factories, the types of jobs they carried out changed with the move from a peacetime to a wartime. There was often some resentment as women began to take over what were seen as traditionally male jobs. Some of the munitionettes experienced hostility from their male co-workers, and there was resistance to them earning the same wages as men.
These men, you see, as we went in, they knew we were going to start this. You know, it goes round. They didn't want to show us. Mr. Bond, the Sergeant Major Bond, who was in charge of us, he said to me, so you'll have to put up with any difficulty you have. He says, come to me. Well, I wasn't going to go to because the man was rude. I never went to the major about it. They didn't want to show us their livelihood. You see, they knew it was their livelihood coming. Women were coming in. You see, they were going to cut the wages. Women, you know. It all that to put up with. They didn't say anything to me, but you had that feeling you're going to take a man's wage from him. Although there's some blasted women coming here. You know how you'd feel.
There were also strict rules. The workers wore wooden clogs so as to avoid the sparks that could be caused by shoes with any metal in them. Other metal items were prohibited, including jewelry and hairpins. They were not allowed to have any matches on them. Something which cost Lillian Miles' friend her job. It says right here, the girl was in prison for this accidental crime. She never got over it. Within a few months, she died. She was 20 years of age, they said, and she accidentally had matches in her pocket.
When we went in, we had special clothes. You had a big factory floor with a partition down the middle, and what they call a clean and dirty. When you went in the morning, you took your coat and clothes off, put them in a kit bag, and that was called dirty. And then you went over that, what's name in the middle, over to the clean. You put their overall on, which had a, what's name on the back, your number and the WD on it, and a mob cap. You weren't supposed to wear any hairpins, any hooks and eyes, anything metal. You mustn't have on you. And special shoes with WD on, and we went into the clean. We wore our ordinary clothes, but you had to wear their overall. It was all covered up with mob caps, and because we weren't allowed to have in our hair, anything in our hair, all loose, you know. No, nothing in his shoes to keep them on. No, nothing metal. No hooks and eyes, no, nothing metal, no button. Even linen buttons got a metal ring. Mustn't wear them.
Okay. And then here's a silent footage of soldiers throwing grenades and firing them from a catapult. So they're putting the grenade in there. Look at that. They're going to throw that now. They're going to launch that. Wow. Wow, look how far that went, guys. That was so far. It was crazy. Okay. And then here's a picture gallery of weapons used in the First World War. So here's some British gunners taking a break. And let's see, this is a quick-firing 18-pounder field gun. Here's a material. This is a picture above of the front of the war. This is a Vickers 303-inch Class C medium machine gun. There's a Lewis 303-inch machine gun, 1914. Okay, we've got a Sopwith Snipe ready for patrol over the German lines. 2 British fighters. This is just a picture destroying a German aircraft. And there's some flying goggles. This is a 3-inch Stokes mortar. Mortars of all sizes were used in their Western Front. Their size mobility offered advantages over conventional artillery, as they could be fired within the safety of a trench. They were also effective at taking out any machine guns. When a bomb was dropped into the tube, it would hit a firing pin at the bottom and be launched. It could fire 20 bombs per minute. So there's kind of a picture of how you would, this right here is Australians loading a trench mortar. And there's a mine detonating during the Battle of the Somme, 1916. An ammo bag from a mine. Here's engineers mining under a ridge. Short magazine, Lee Enfield 303. These are some bayonets. Remember, he showed us those in the pictures, how they would be attached to the end of your sword, end of your gun, so it could be a sword. That's a gas hood. The Germans first used gas against the French in 1914, firing shells containing a chemical irritant that caused violent fits of sneezing. In 1915, they used a form of tear gas. These early experiments were a small taste of things to come. As the war progressed, all sides developed even more lethal gases, including chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gas. It's a gas rattle. I don't know if you can actually go in and see this closer. I can't figure out how to do that. It's a Morning Star. That's an improvised, they would call this an improvised weapon. Oop, there it went back to something for me. I see. Okay. There's one of the female tanks. There's an anti-tank bullet. Oh, all that barbed wire. Oh, that stuff is awful. Stuff is awful. Hand grenade. These are grenades. Troops in training jumping over a trench. All of those are different. And then this is artillery and mortars. I think I'll just put up this link for you guys because this is kind of a little bit more complicated. And if you want to view that more, you can with that.